Yes, you are you?
Oh, okay. Welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission. Okay, welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting of Thursday, April 20th, 2017. Can I have roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Carignati?
Present.
Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Here.
And Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
Thank you, all present.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Monday, April 17th, 2017, on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. We have our minutes here. Does anybody have any additions or corrections to the minutes of March 16th? No? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Carignati? Oh, are we doing the roll call?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Need the second. Okay. Commissioner Vartanian?
Abstain, I was not here.
Okay. Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
And Madam Chair Vidor?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay,
Motion to-
next is, thank you very much. Next is oral communications, and I have two cards. So first up is Francesca Smith.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I think I know all of you. I am privileged to serve on the board of directors of the Glendale Historical Society, as you may know. In my real life, I'm an architectural historian for the state. I have 3 decades of experience in this. And what we do at the state is we make determinations of eligibility, which is somewhat different from what cities do in environmental documents and so forth. I've worked with state historic preservation officers all over the country on tens and tens of thousands of evaluations, and have had a serious disagreement on one bridge once in Texas. TGHS is pleased to agree with the City of Glendale's professionally qualified staff on 2 recent landmark nominations where backyard pool alterations became obstacles to the Historic Preservation Commission's decisions. We have recently seen uncertainty from the Commission in how these modifications should be considered in making your recommendations to Council. Some seem to misinterpret the basic principles of the standards for rehabilitation to mean that imitative additions or alterations are preferable to compatible differentiated changes to what may be historical resources. Rehabilitation is defined as when alterations or additions to the historic property are planned for a new or continued use, and when a depiction at a particular period of time is not appropriate. So it's not the case that it's preferable to use imitative architecture or styles in adding something to a historic building. In the 2 cases that I'll be less obtuse, that are 1450 Royal and 915 Each Mountain, both are Spanish colonial revival houses. Both are very qualified to be local landmark, to be designated as local landmarks. And both backyard pools, while not entirely of the style of the house, are compatible and very differentiated. The standards, the Secretary of the Interior standards under number 3 and number 9 state that changes that state a false sense of historical development, like adding conjectural features or elements from other historic properties, won't be undertaken. Standard 9 is essentially that the new work is differentiated from the old, the materials are compatible, features, size, scale, and proportion and massing to protect the integrity, and that they need to be removable in the future. In both of those cases, while they may not exactly be the pools we would choose for those properties, whether or not they wouldn't be subject to review by the Commission if the buildings were on the register now and those pools were being added. It would be subject merely to staff review. And while I can't say whether or not staff would approve both of those pools, maybe at the time, maybe in the 80s, that one pool would have been approved and the other pool is essentially differentiated. One of the big tests for that is whether a stand-by would be able to tell what's old and what's new. And in both of those cases, I think they're compatible and they're differentiated. You can tell that it's not part of the original property. Under the standards, additions or changes don't need to match the design and the period of significance of the property. It's recommended certainly that they be differentiated, as I've been flogging you, as I've been gently reminding you. They're discouraged in the professional preservation community. Part of the problem is future misinterpretation. When those building permits are misplaced, nobody will know what's old and what's new if they match entirely. I think it's pretty simple for anybody to tell that those pools aren't from when the houses were originally built. I'm not sure what the process is, since you all, I think, as I could tell from the minutes, continued both of those items. We suggest that both of those properties be reconsidered using the criteria rather than focusing on the backyard pools. And we recommend both properties designation. They meet the criteria. I'm not certain if you call it back up, if staff calls it back up, if the homeowners bring it back to you, what that process would be. But I think they should both be really reconsidered. And I thank you for your time and for listening. Thank you.
I don't think we can have a discussion about this because it isn't on the agenda, but if Mr. Platt, if you would like to comment on the process of how it comes back, since, you know, that's...
Yeah, in terms of just process in general, but in both cases, this will come back to the commission when the homeowners alert us that they're ready. They've worked with either a landscape designer or pool person. In one case, I've already had one site visit and discussed it. In the mountain case, I'm sure that will happen once we have an opportunity. So that would be that process. I don't know that I need to remind the commission, but in addition to being the city's font of preservation wisdom and the guardians of designated buildings and the gatekeepers for future buildings, you are also a design review authority in the same way that the design review board is. You do have the opportunity to include design issues that aren't necessarily historically related in your deliberation. I completely agree with what Mrs. Smith said in terms of differentiation, and though I appreciate saying that staff had approved it, and I didn't personally think that, but that ultimately doesn't matter. It's ultimately what the board or what the commission thinks. But just in terms of process, you're well within the bounds of your duties to discuss design issues that may deviate somewhat from what a pure historic approach would be, or to go beyond the history to also consider just basic design principles. For the Mills Act, you have that opportunity, and as Mrs. Smith said, in both cases, she's correct that these would be staff approvals. Hopefully some of the things we see today wouldn't have been approved, but you can't say exactly what would have happened, but that would be the goal.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Thank you for your comments. Where are we? No, we have one more. Oral communication, Larry Morehouse.
Thank you, Commission. My name is Larry Morehouse. I'm a resident of the city. I have a little comment here I wanted to make first. The power plant for the city of Glendale, located on San Fernando Road, called the Grayson Power Plant, began in 1938 and has expanded to what exists today. It has provided the necessary electrical energy for our city through World War II, Korean War, the Cold War, Vietnam War, Desert Storm, and every event that has confronted our city up to the present. Most of the engineering and design was done within the city's own public service division. There exists more history at the Grayson Power Plant than any other building or facility or home that will ever come before this commission. This plant has been approved by council to be totally torn down and removed with no discussions to document its history and contribution to the growth of our city and its citizens. I was the plant manager from 1988 until 2008 at Grayson. While I was the plant manager, I learned of the significant history of the power plant and the contributions it made to the city. Now, I know that the plant is old. The city has to replace the plant. They need the real estate. However, if that's the case, then certainly there ought to be some effort made by the city of Glendale to document the history of the facility in the form of pictures, a book, comments, people who worked there, the events that took place over the years, and the contribution it made to the city. In addition, there are some things in the old power plant that could be saved and incorporated into some kind of educational or visitors facility, either at the site or somewhere within the city, to make sure that the history is not forgotten. The plant was, the construction of the plant was approved in 1938. I was born in 1938, so I understand the facility very well. So even though it's old, maybe it's not that old. But if you research the history of that area down there that took place from the 30s right up until present, some of the machinery, the bulk of the machinery that's running down there was forged in 1935, and the machinery is still running to this day. It not only has a historical significance to Glendale, but it also has a historical significance to the industrial society of this country. And I would hope that somewhere, I don't know where your responsibilities lie in the commission, but I know that you probably have some influence with the city council and the Glendale Water and Power, and somehow could encourage them not to lose sight of this history and somehow incorporate it into this $500 million project that they're venturing off to replace it. If they go in and tear down the facility and wreck it out, everything in there will go to scrap. The steel will probably go to China, you know, and the history will go with it. So that's why I'm here today. I hope that somebody hears me, and you can discuss it with the city council and see if we can't recover some of the history. If you stop and think about a lot of the projects that you approve, they're simple homes, important residents live there, architects. But if you compare these projects with Grayson Power Plant, there is no comparison. So for somebody not to do the job to recover that history or save it would be a big loss to the city of Glendale. So that's why I'm here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you're aware, Mr. Morehouse, this doesn't solve the problem you brought up, but we in the commission do have a program where we have selected and kind of earmarked or identified significant city-owned properties that should be landmarked. We did look at, I don't think it's the Grayson, it's the smaller plant.
We looked at the substation, the Grand substation.
Yeah,
on
we,
San Fernando
because
Road.
of its architecture, we also looked at the substation, and that one, you know, we had to ask the city of Glendale if they accepted these, and some of them they did, and they have been landmarked, and we're continuing to landmark these properties. We're doing it as volunteers. So we do have a program, but no, that's okay. You don't have to respond, because we can't really talk about this. We can't really talk about it, but I just wanted you to be aware of that, and would encourage you to also, since you are so eloquent, to express yourself to the council too, and we'll look into it. Do you have anything to add, Jay? Or
Well, the most important thing, and you'll be interested to hear this, nothing is a done deal at this point. City Council's authorized GWP to move forward with the process to replace the main boiler building and the cooling towers with kind of modern technology that's more efficient, less pollution, et cetera. But this will be going through an environmental impact report process. So you will have an opportunity, any member of the public, the commission, anyone will be able to comment on this process about whatever aspect of it you feel is important. I think what I heard from you, and I certainly agree, is that documentation of the site is really critical, and it's a fascinating site. I've been able to walk through it, and it's beautiful, and it's, just the boilers and a lot of stuff there is very interesting. I would encourage you to stay in touch with us to find out when the comment period for the EIR is open to the public, which will be, I believe, a 45-day period. And that comment is certainly germane to the discussion, and hopefully would be taken up by council, and we would hire a professional documentation crew to go through there and do that. And this stands for any other aspect, whether it's a historic resource or not. I think what's important at Grayson is it's going to continue its use as a power plant. That's not changing, of course, but there will be a significant change at the site because they're proposing to tear down the big building that we know when we're on San Fernando Road or on the flyover or looking across the river. So I don't unfortunately know the time frame for the EIR, the draft review period. I think it's coming sometime soon, so I would certainly think it would be the next few months. And you probably know people who can tell you that, or you can check in with me or someone else here.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else have any comments?
Well, I would just like to know, is there a chance to tour the Grayson power plant? The historic aspects of it?
That's all it.
We could check with GWP if the commission is making that request. I could certainly ask if and when that's a possibility.
I'd be interested.
Yeah.
They have given
Yes.
tours. Some of the staff there are amazingly knowledgeable about the site, and they've been there for decades. And staff got a tour quite a while ago now, and so I'll check and then give you guys an update next month or
Thank you.
sooner if it's available.
All right. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Comments from commissioners? Anybody?
Can I say something if you could, or do you have?
Yeah.
Well, I have one comment. This has to do with the Historic Society of the Crescenta Valley. At the end of the month, they're having a booth at the Crescenta Valley Hometown Fair, Country Fair. It's on Saturday, April 29th, 2017, at Crescenta Valley Park, 3901 Dunsmore Avenue, at the corner of Dunsmore and Honolulu Avenue. The Historic Society of the Crescenta Valley will be there with our booth with a lot of historic photographs and some of the significant things that made the Crescenta Valley. We're also pairing with the Friends of Rockhaven, who will also have a booth. So we invite you all to come up. It's just from 10 till 6 at Crescenta Valley Park, and you can breathe our wonderful air up there and have a good time. They have a car show and all sorts of other stuff, but the only thing I'm most interested in is the historical aspect of the park itself. So we invite you all up, and thank you very much.
And while I don't usually have any comments during your comment period, I just wanted you all and the public to know, related to what Mr. Morgan just said, that Mike Morgan is the new president of the Historical Society of the Crescenta Valley.
Did not know that.
You
Thank
are?
you very much.
Wow.
Thank
He
you.
takes on another hat,
Good.
and you're in good hands.
He's so humble. He doesn't even let us know.
Who knew? Thank you.
There you go.
Congratulations.
And then I just quickly, if I may,
Yeah.
I just quickly wanted to say that I look forward to participating in the Glendale Historical Society's Restoration Expo this Sunday. And I think we're having a booth and a table there. So encourage the public to please come out and learn about preserving and restoring your historic homes or whatever your resources might be, and speaking with us.
Great.
It's a lot of fun.
Anyone else? Okay, I just wanted to bring something into the public record. I had sent a letter to the Design Review Board about the recent project that was reviewed by them for a new house next to our Devine House, which is on the Glendale State and National Register of Historic Places. And my letter, which I gave a copy to Jay so it can be entered into the record, really called out the importance of defining what constitutes a highly significant historic structure, so that if there is any reason for the HPC to weigh in on siting, massing scale of adjacent properties, which would not be applicable to all houses, certainly, but in this case, I felt it would have been good for us to review it because it is such a unique architecture. The land that's being built upon was originally part of the original land, and it seemed because it was on the National Register that it rose to a higher level of significance than just regular. So that was the idea there, and I know that we're not really making policy on the commission. We're reviewing applications, but that would be maybe a change in the ordinance to give us a consultative role. We've had it before for significant properties, commercial ones and institutional ones, and I think in the case where any property, residential or otherwise, is on the National Register of Historic Places, it deserves a look by HPC if somebody's going to build adjacent. Now, I recognize that the adjacent property is not in the historic district. It's not part of an infill issue from a historic district standpoint, but nevertheless, it just seemed like, there was a big tempest in a teapot about it, and we didn't really have knowledge of it, so that's all I really have to say about that.
And on that, I can, in terms of policy, yes, the boards and commissions don't make policy, they implement policy, but the ordinance, the Historic Preservation Ordinance is written in a way that the commission is able to, and I'd have to quote I don't have it, I could find it, but it's to recommend, to suggest, so it uses not the most active verbs out there, but the idea is that your views can be brought to City Council, and then City Council can decide whether or not to take up an issue and therefore initiate the process to change an ordinance. And, this has come up before, it'll come up again. The general city policy is that the commission reviews designated properties and then makes new designated properties. We've brought several things to you over the years. The most recent examples are typically things where it's a publicly funded project, very high-profile project. We've never had something quite like what's happening at Art Even. And in general, our goal is for things to move through the process with one design review authority attached to it, whether it's DRB or HPC. And we try to tell people we don't have two hoops that you're jumping through, it's just one or the other. There's certainly room for that to change, and certainly room, if council is interested, to kind of create a provision, and that's where the trick would be. Would it be which properties would be reviewed first by HPC and then by DRB versus, which wouldn't? And that's kind of a tricky part, and we'd have to think about that and probably look to see how other cities handle it. One thing that is on a related note, just by way of an update, is that we are moving forward after quite a while with bringing to council and to the planning commission and in the interim kind of protections for historic district properties during the period between being initiated by HPC and finally being designated, which can be 2 or 3 years later. And we ran into a problem with that a few years ago. Our effort to change the ordinance kind of stalled out due to several issues, several internal issues. I have two applications in my office right now for new historic districts, and so it suddenly became called to my attention. We got to fix that. We got to figure out how that will work. We have several options. I have my recommendation, which we'll be making, which is that Design Review Authority shift to HPC during that interim period. There were discussions in-house about other options and pros and cons. we'll revisit it with the city attorney. But I want to bring that to Planning Commission and City Council very quickly, so then we can start moving on the new nominations. So it's a related issue. What I'll do based on your discussion, and I don't know if you want to make it like City Council, if there's concurrence from your colleagues, I'll raise it with the Director of Community Development and our Deputy Director, and then up through the city managers through them, to just express that the commission would like to have a little more oversight for these kind of projects on adjacent sites, and leave it open in terms of which ones, so that we can work that out later.
Okay, thank you.
So there's general agreement there?
Yes.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay, so we'll bring that up the ladder and see where it goes, and then you also all have access to your appointing council members to discuss things like this, which is often how things move through the process. So.
Yeah. I moved to Sacramento, but anyway, okay.
Question,
Yeah.
Jay. So, Jay, did I hear you say that the two historic district applications might be held up while your interim
Very, very likely
change
would
goes through
be.
planning and city council?
They're very likely to be held up just because we don't have enough time to process things right now. Our new intern is working part-time and will start full-time hopefully next month. And I expect the summer to be a very productive period. And but I think it's wise to try to get this nailed down right now, and we'll talk about it internally if there's a provision to move forward with them without having the final council decision, because that's what we've done before. It's not a change from how it's been done before, but also don't want to run into the problems we've had previously. So.
No, I agree. I think it's important. I'm sure you don't have an exact timeline. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing correctly.
Yeah,
There might be a little.
I've prepared the applicants for a delay, and hopefully it's not too horrible. Because we definitely, it's nice to have two solid nominations coming forward. So.
Of course. And only one intern for the summer?
She's in grad school in Heritage Conservation at USC, so she'll be back in school end of August, but with us on a part-time basis. So.
Okay. We definitely need more staffing.
Yeah, she'll make her
I'll
debut
keep
hopefully at
saying
the
it.
next HPC.
Here.
Okay, so we're done with comments. We have no old business, so on to 7A finally. 408 Ross Street, landmark application, so I guess we'll start with the staff report.
Okay,
Jay,
let me
or-
just finish my notes so I don't
Okay.
skip that I have to.
Staff report first and then oral communications.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, here is tonight's Glendale Register nomination, and it's a good one because we do not have a lot of craftsmen on the register, and it's exciting to see a house, from my perspective, that's been very well taken care of over the years, has a fascinating history, has current owners, residents who look to be very good stewards of the property and have proven to be so far. So I just want to run you through a bit of the history and just a look at the house. This is 408 Ross Street. This is in the neighborhood that is one of the proposed historic districts, the Casa Verdugo Historic District as proposed. There's a little bit of confusion. I made an error in the staff report because I called it the Verdugo Viejo neighborhood,
Right.
which you can see to the left here, which this map unfortunately called just Verdugo. Brand Boulevard running north-south. Technically, in the city's neighborhood map concept, this is the Ross Moines neighborhood. Someday we will definitely be calling it the Casa Verdugo neighborhood, assuming this moves through the process and council designates the district. Historically, it was called Casa Verdugo, so there's just a little bit of naming confusion that's not too meaningful, hopefully. Here's 408 Ross in its current location. So the house was not built at this location. If you read the staff report or toured, I'm sure you already are aware of this. A very good example of a two-story craftsman property. We originally thought, oh, it looks like an airplane bungalow. As we visited the site and realized the extent of the second floor, it doesn't feel like the classic airplane, so we're just kind of going with a craftsman designation for this. It has this wonderful history, so we'll get to the architecture in a minute, but It was built by Charles Beggs and his wife Lola. I'm sorry, it wasn't built by Charles Beggs. They were the first owners. So they bought the house in 1917. It was built by James Wyvell in 1915. It looks like it was a spec house and that he was a developer. As far as we know, the Beggses were the first owners. Beggs has kind of an interesting story, and I'm sure Mr. Morgan will be able to elaborate on this more than I could, but he was a railroad man, and he was involved with the California Southern Railroad and the Frisco Railroad system. He never was running these companies. He was never the big boss, but he was definitely involved in the industry at, you know, an important point in history in the early part of the 20th century. What's kind of cool is that he has a town named after him in Oklahoma. Normally I'd say, you have a town named after you, you must be an incredibly important person. Here we can't quite get to that point based on the information that we have, but because he and his wife were the first owners, staff would recommend that this house be called the Beggs House, just for our standard naming policy. And there's definitely interesting information in the nomination. What is cool is that the house was originally located at 1107 North Louise, and the Beggses decided they had bought the lot in 1917 on Ross Street. In 1925, they decided to build an apartment building on their Louise property, so they had the house moved to the Ross location. And we all think moving houses is this kind of crazy thing, but it was actually done quite a bit back in the day, and much bigger, much heavier buildings have been moved over the years, so moving a little craftsman like this was probably an easy process for the people who did it. What I love is that they built a house that's now on an apartment building that's now on the Glendale Register on the site of their former home location. So this is what it was originally called the Barbara Worth Apartments, which is now called the Louise Dryden Apartments. I wish we had originally called it the Barbara Worth Apartments, because we don't have a lot of buildings named after fictional characters. I'm sure Ms. Yurka in the audience would be interested in having a Mildred Pierce house in Glendale, but we're not there yet. So we do have the Barbara Worth building.
Pierce House.
What's that?
There is a Mildred Pierce House in Glendale.
I know, but it's not designated as the Mildred Pierce house. So you know that's another story. Here's a photo of the apartment building today, just for reference. So it's been on the register for a long time. It's Glendale Register number 49. It's always been a fascinating building to me, because when I first started, the city's designation said it was an Egyptian revival building, and I have trouble seeing that when I look at this building. Deepika, when she wrote the report, I had said it's really kind of eclectic, and so she wrote eclectic style. Not really a style, but it's got different things going. If you ever have a chance, and this is a side note, I'm sorry we're not on your house right now, but if you ever have a chance to get inside this building, it has amazing murals painted on all of the hallway walls. Really beautiful, kind of early California, very romantic, kind of dark toned murals. So it's even more interesting on the inside, I think, than it is on the outside. Anyways, back to our story. You can see in the top right corner the location of the house that you were considering for designation when it was at its original location. And within the same shot, we can see the location in the lower left where the empty lot for 408 Ross was. So it was a relatively short move as those things go, uphill, obviously. Back then, not as many street lights and power poles and everything to worry about, but still you can see some of that out there. Here's the permit showing 1925, a proposal to move the house. It said it was a 38 by 42 plaster house. I don't know if, you know, obviously there were plaster walls on the inside, but we certainly don't think it had plaster on the exterior. And then the applicants, the Fay family, have early photos. So these are photos from 1925 after the house was at its existing location. And this is what helps us start piecing together, you know, that the house is very intact. And it's been rare, but not totally uncommon for us considering designations where we have the earlier original photos and we see the current photos, and we can start going back and forth and seeing things. For example, when I first saw the house in its current condition, let's go back, sorry. I just presumed, looking at the front porch configuration, that the room on the left was an infill of the existing open porch, and looking at the brick piers and the little columns that you see over here, that, you know, just gives you a clue that something may have happened there. When we had the chance to tour the house with Mrs. Fay, we were able to see, you know, flooring, molding profiles, every element suggested that this is an original enclosed feature. So it just shows us, you know, designs were done differently by different builders, and in this case, one of the giveaways is we don't have a column back here where you'd expect, if it were a wraparound porch, you'd expect a brick pier and a column there. So that's kind of one of the fun things about doing this kind of investigative work and looking at things like this. But in both cases, at the front facade, the house is in very original condition. At the rear, there is an addition that appears to be an early addition, obviously, since it was there in 1925. That was made to the back of the sunroom that you have here. And more or less, the rest of the house is intact. We have a few alterations that were made over the years, but first let's look at some of the features that are with us still. A lot of nice details: original front door, original flooring on the porch, original ruffle brick, which we'll look at in a second, which was a term I'd never heard until this application came in. Interesting gable venting, mostly original windows throughout the house. The rear elevation, there are a couple of alterations, most notably the porch structure, which you can see in this. There was a little shed cover over the rear steps, and here we just have a new porch. And a minor alteration here, there's a basement door below this photo that you can't see all of. There's a little shed roof addition that was put there just to keep water from running down into the basement area. At the front, we have one window that was infilled for interior reasons when I believe it was a shower, bathroom alterations were made in that corner. And they did something similar to what we did at the Masonic Temple, where we left the ghost of the original window there. So the original framing is still there with an infill panel, and we thought that was an appropriate treatment, and we think it's appropriate to maintain that if you decide to recommend designation of the house. One other thing, and I can't remember if this made its way into the report, but it's interesting because we rarely, if ever, have done this. If you see this Christmas tree here, and when you visited the house, you saw the massive deodar cedar, it appears to be the same tree. And we have a provision in the ordinance that if a landscape feature is called out in the report, which is why I will amend this report before we go to City Council if it's not in there. I can't remember if
It's in
is.
there.
it is. Oh, good, good, thank you.
So is the pecan tree, I think.
No.
No?
Well,
Okay.
probably won't designate the pecan tree, but we definitely want a feature like this to be part of the designation and memorialized that way, and hopefully it sticks around for a long time. The garage was added in 2001 by previous owners. It's in the style of the house, perhaps too imitative for the Secretary of the Interior standards, but it is what it is today, and I don't think it detracts from the historic character of the property at all. And looking around, when we do our site visits, we're always looking to see where the house has been altered, what's been going on. We found 2 windows that you probably noticed if you had a chance to visit that we're recommending for replacement with appropriate wood windows. And just for fun, because the term ruffle brick was something I wasn't familiar with, and they salvaged these bricks from the demolished chimney that was taken down after the Northridge earthquake, and have reused them for the rebuilt chimney, and there's still some bricks on site, but you see at the porch and at the chimney, the brick has this kind of interesting layered texture that's almost like kind of fabric-like in a way. So we call that out in the nomination. Staff is very supportive of the nomination, and we did not find that it met criterion 2 for Charles or Lola Beggs, or any subsequent owners for that matter. We do believe that as a very intact example of what is, as we all know, an increasingly rare style in Glendale, that this house really does have exemplary characteristics of the craftsman style, maintains most of its character-defining features, and to me is very worthy of designation under criterion 3. We do have two recommendations for Mills Act conditions, replacement of the non-original windows at the two windows, and then also replacement of the, now I say non-original garage door, that's probably a mistake. It probably is the original garage door, but it is certainly consistent with commission practice to look for wood doors on these historic houses where we know that wood would have been appropriate originally. I think this does raise a philosophical issue you may want to discuss. And then per the comments from the Historical Society, we did look at the kind of deck addition at the rear as a modern intervention, clearly not part of the original structure. Could it be different? Could it be better? Possibly, but we didn't think, we don't recommend that that be altered as a Mills Act condition, but if you disagree, obviously, that's your decision to make. So that's everything that I've got for you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Jay at this point? Otherwise, we'll hear from the public. No? Okay. First speaker is Catherine Yurka, and then we'll hear from the owner. I don't know. You wanna...
Hi, my name is Catherine Yurka. I thought Robin, since she worked so hard on this, should have the honor of going first. Recently,
the honor of going last.
Recently, the Glendale Historical Society's Preservation Advocacy Committee and board discussed whether or not we should start weighing in on properties, privately owned residential properties that have been nominated for the Glendale Register. And we decided that in certain circumstances we would like to do this. And so this is the first one where we have appeared at a hearing to speak on behalf of a privately owned residence. We are very excited to have this property listed on the Glendale Register. This is our year of the craftsman. And in addition to mourning the ongoing demolition of so many craftsmen in Glendale, it's nice to be able to celebrate the responsible preservation and stewardship of one. Our home tour this year is a craftsman home tour, and this is the featured house on our tour, and we're very thrilled about that. And so we urge you to agree that this property is worthy of designation and to so vote. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Robin Fay. Finally.
Oh, that's right. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robin Fye, and
I'm sorry.
I know my kids are going crazy over there. Tell her.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry, Fies.
My husband, Court, and I are the owners of 408 Ross, and we originally had an awesome little 1930s Art Deco modern house in Burbank, and then we had our second baby, and that house got real small real quick. So we originally were in escrow on this great 20s Spanish in Silver Lake. And then we were down to like the last few days of the inspection period, and then we found pictures of this house online. We thought, oh, let's sneak into the broker's open. It wasn't open to the public, it was agents only, but we snuck in with our baby, and we saw it, and we loved it. And we went out to the garage and talked to the owner who was hiding out there in his office, and to the horror of our realtors, we pulled out of the Silver Lake house and bought this one before it ever even actually went on the market. And we have loved it since the moment we walked onto that giant porch. And we both firmly believe that when you buy an historic home, you automatically become its caretaker. And that's a huge reason why we're doing this. You know, we hope to own it for a long time, but there's never a guarantee. And we want to know that when we don't own it, it won't be torn down or have something awful happen to it. Because, you know, once the railroad came up here, Glendale was built on craftsmen's, and we're losing more of them every year. So we look forward to protecting this. And, you know, part of the fun has been the onion peeling of this kooky history of this awesome house. And with the huge help of Sean Brissell with the Historical Society, you know, I spent months trying to find out where this house came from. And then to hear it was moved, and then to get the names of Charles and Lola Beggs was just amazing. And then to find that photo of it in its original house, in its original little nest, you know, there it was on this big double lot on huge Louise Street. So when you drove into Casa Verdugo, there was my house. And, you know, I love knowing that he moved his house from Casa Verdugo to Casa Verdugo and then gave Casa Verdugo a landmark in the form of the apartment building. So I would love to see Charles Beggs have 2 landmarks in Casa Verdugo. Thank you. And thank you so much for coming to see the house, because as you could see, I love to share my house with new people. So thank you.
Noticed. Thank you very much. So does anyone, okay, I guess the public hearing is closed. I don't think there's anything controversial to talk about, but what do I know? So would anyone like to start by making a comment or whatever?
I can start. I would
Okay.
like to thank Robin and Court and the sons for allowing us to come to the house. It was wonderful. I mean, the thing that I kept thinking was, you had me at 1915 Craftsman, because while they were wandering around, I stood in back and just, with the Craftsman, and especially a 2-story Craftsman, and you're sitting back and you just get the ambiance of Glendale 1915. It's just, if you're interested in that period of Glendale history, this one house, you know, is the archetype of what Glendale used to be like. And the fact that they moved it to here is just another thing that Glendale did a lot. They moved a lot of properties that people just don't think of that today. But back then, why would you waste, you know, good lumber that had to come from somewhere else to change it? So to me, everything on the house, I mean, I agree with everything that staff said. I though think Mr. Beggs for criteria 2 is important to the California.
I had a feeling.
The California Southern Railway, which started in Bakersfield, worked its way down through Paris and Lake Elsinore to the coast, and then all the way down. So anytime you're on the surf liner going to San Diego, you're on California Southern Railway track. Though he wasn't the president, he was only the vice president, but usually it's the VPs that make the system run. The fact that he had the Barbara Worth apartment building, and what you don't understand about Glendale at that time is they were trying to attract people to come here. I mean, Glendale isn't the Glendale today. Glendale is a place where maybe we'll go here, maybe we'll go to Pasadena. You had to have an attraction for why to be in Glendale, and I think the Barbara Worth and the fact that he lived here and all the little minions that worked very hard to make Glendale the Glendale that we all love today is emblematic, and they owe him a debt, and I think criteria 2 fits him a lot. For a lot of people that are unnamed that were in Glendale, that, like I said, made us the place that we are. So I wish it could be on criteria 2. I don't quickly.
It can be.
Well, I think it should be on there. I'm glad that they want to name it for Charles. His wife, well, you know, nothing gets done if your wife doesn't tell you that, you know, you can have it. And yes, I think there's 2 you know, the fact that it'll have 2 landmarks in Casa Verdugo, great. And Casa Verdugo was the place where people came, you know, to come up to the Ramada and eat and the whole bit. So it's almost the beginning, you know, little property area. You know, it's not really the first subdivision, but it's one of the very early subdivisions for here. So, I mean, I could go on with all the things that they put in the report. I agree with everything that staff has said about what needs to be replaced on it. But overall, I mean, if you ever get a chance to go just sit in the backyard and stare up at the house and want to know what it was like to be in Glendale in an early time in the afternoon, about 4 o'clock when the wind picks up, this is the place to be. And if she charged $5, I'd be there all the time, just sit there. So,
There you go.
With a glass of Pelinconi wine.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So yes, I wholeheartedly hope this is on the Glendale Register. I hope everybody else concurs the same. So.
Thank you. Anyone? Who's next?
So, you know, I think we tend to struggle with criterion 2. So I'd be curious to hear, you know, I'm kind of, I don't know, I'd probably want to hear a little more. I think definitely the railroads were a big deal back then. That's basically what built, you know, our nation, and as stated, brought a lot of people here to our city. So property must be associated with a person, persons, or group who significantly contributed to the history of the nation, state, region, or city. So, so I don't know if anybody else wants to think about that. Yeah, what can we say? I mean, it's an outstanding example of the craftsman style. our own Glendale craftsmen. We don't have the huge, craftsmen we see in Pasadena, but I think this is an absolutely beautiful home. And despite having numerous owners, apparently it was very well respected and cared for over the years. And I can't imagine better custodians than your family. And so and I think I can speak for my colleagues, we truly appreciate your custodianship and your, what's the word I'm looking for, enthusiasm about the home and all the research you've done, just amazing. And I'm fine with designating the tree. When we do that, what does that mean? Does it just stay there until it falls down someday?
Yeah, we have to respect that it will pass away.
I mean, hopefully it doesn't, but...
It gives us latitude. A future owner who says, oh, I'm worried this tree's going to fall down on the house, we're going to say, well, we're going to keep the tree. We can talk to you about trimming the tree. We'd work with the city arborist to see what's best for the tree. But to the greatest extent possible, we try to keep it alive and part of the site. So.
Perfect. I do support that. And then, yeah, thank you for pointing out that the remnant of the original window in the dining room, it's nice when people leave clues instead of trying to make everything perfect. It helps us understand what happened. But overall, yes, I support the nomination, and thank you so much for the tour.
Well, I fully support what my colleagues have said as well. I mean, it's a beautiful home, and we have very few of craftsman style. It's nice to have some that can compete with Pasadena.
That's right. That's right.
So anyway, we are very great. We're very grateful for owners like you who have spent so much time meticulously restoring it, and have a project plan like down to adjusting the windows and getting them all operating perfectly and beautifully. Like you can just tell you're very detail oriented and care so much about the home, and so we really appreciate owners like you. I support staff's recommendations on the tree, on the conditions, on recommending this to City Council that it's nominated. I don't really have a strong opinion either way on criterion 2. We don't have a good basis for whether someone rises to the level of it being named after them, or actually nominated after them. So I'm not really sure. We've all agreed at some point, and then City Council has overruled us all on whether it should be under that criteria or not. So
just on one case. So.
Yes, one case. So either way, maybe I can just hear from some of the others if there's opinion on Briggs or things.
My turn? Okay. Again, thank you for bringing it forward. This really is a great house, and I concur with everything they've said. I think criterion 2, I mean, why not give it a shot? Fortunately, it really stands out with criterion 3, so we don't really have to worry about, I don't think, that holding things up. And it might be nice to establish criterion 2 a little bit more frequently when we can. So I would say if we can add that. Is that something we just add into the motion?
Yeah, you can say you find it eligible under criterion 2 and 3.
Okay. As for conditions, I'm kind of neither here nor there about the garage door. I would kind of leave that to everybody else to discuss. It's not an original feature of the house or structure of the house, so I'm not sure it needs to necessarily fall under our purview. But if staff recommends it, I'm going to sort of lean towards what they have to say about that. So that's it. But thank you again for bringing it forward. I think it's a great opportunity for us to have as many craftsmen as we can get. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. A remarkable amount of history that you dug up. I mean, really, compared to, I was amazed, because oftentimes people seek a lot of help from professionals, and I know you had help, but you really dug deep there to get a lot of information, and that's really admirable. And you can kind of self-appoint yourself leaders of the craftsman movement, which we hope will burgeon in the city, because I'm telling you what really bothers me, and I think it bothers all of us, not to digress too much, is the amount of craftsman homes, especially in central Glendale and south Glendale, but other places too, that are being demolished because they're either, and I'm quoting, and I hope people don't use these terms anymore, widows and orphans, that these houses are widows and orphans, which means they're last remaining so they don't matter, and that is not true collectively. We have an admirable craftsman inventory of houses in Glendale, all over Glendale. So I'm hoping that things will change, and your house is going to be highly visible, and I think it's going to shed a lot of light, I hope, on the rest of the city and inspire other people to do what you're doing. I think, I agree with everything everybody has said. I feel just as passionately and enthusiastically about your house as the rest of the commission. I think it would be a good idea to replace, I think you were planning to anyway, the door of the garage, just because that whole thing about replicating, well, it's a good replication, and it's obviously new, but, a wood door would look very nice there. So I also think there's a door with an aluminum window in it that might be a good idea to eventually replace that as well. I think the tree is a great idea. I think that as far as Mr. Beggs is concerned, well, I have to admit, I don't want to be a party pooper here, but it took a great army of very dedicated people to build the railroad system. We've had this debate a lot here about significance of people. We had the head of Kiev Radio, and then we had this guy who was the big television personality, and there have been others. Baker. And I think this person is a notable person. But when you look at the scope of the railroad industry and you look at him versus somebody like, a Richardson or a Good or a Huntington, I think, I'm not sure I would, I could flip either way, but, I would say I'm kind of leaning on the side of, for consistency's sake, the way we've ruled on these things, to leave Beggs out and just name the house after him, and you have a wonderful set of historical documents there. But I'm not sure, I'm sitting next to an expert in railroad history, so it's kind of hard for me to say anything with any kind of sense of authority, but that's just my feeling about it. So please argue with me.
Well, the only thing I'd like to say is, being vice president of the California Southern, it was a very influential railroad. If you go down to San Diego is part of what San Diego is because of the California Southern. The railroads came out to Los Angeles and went south, and the California Southern was one of them. I haven't read his papers, I didn't do an extensive research on him, but, to come back in a couple of weeks, I could probably have more information on him himself. But it's more, to me, is these people that occupy Glendale at this period of time and the things that they do to make Glendale grow. You have to understand, Glendale started out at 2,600 people in 1906. He's building this house in 1915, when the population, I think it's 4,000 people in Glendale at the time. There has to be a reason for people to want to come to Glendale, and it's people like Charles Beggs and a lot of other people, E.D. Good, L.C. Rand, to name a few, that made it so that people wanted to come here. And the fact that, he was part of this railroad that made it so that people wanted to go south to San Diego and made San Diego the place that it is, the naval base that it became, is because of people like Charles H. Beggs. But without reading his...
Is it about Charles Beggs
yes,
specifically?
I'm talking about...
People like is one thing, but I think the question here is, yes, he was vice president. He was a very high-level person in the railroad, but specifically, and maybe I missed it in the application, so please refresh my memory here. What did specifically he do?
Well, I don't, we haven't had enough time to what he actually did, but I would like to, like Commissioner Craig Noddy said, it's like, it's already going to be nominated under 3. If you want sufficient information on him as criterion 2, I would like to, put it forward, and if, can you withdraw a criterion?
Well, there are many points you could discuss. The reason the staff did not think that Beggs met the criterion wasn't because he isn't important. We didn't have enough information to gauge his importance, put it in the broader context, and determine what he did that actually
added to history, changed history locally or regionally or beyond. In the context of previous nominations, for example, we had the Wellman House in Rossmoyne near Royal Boulevard. I believe Mr. Wellman was a vice president of the bank, which we always tell people, being successful in business, being wealthy, being a philanthropist, joining the right clubs, giving to the right groups, doesn't necessarily mean you've changed the course of development around you, but it could. And so with Wellman, we didn't think when we first got that nomination that we had enough information. And we basically, before it got to the commission, we asked the applicant to dig a little deeper and provide more research, which actually turned up information showing that he had kind of a national presence in economic policy making decisions and had a statewide presence and actually supported things and did things that led to things being different. For me, I'm not from Missouri, but it's more like, show me. I want to know what's really happening here. With Art Baker, the same thing. And even then, I wasn't if you go back to that staff report, I wasn't 1,000. I was like, I think there's enough here. I think he did things interesting, and I thought he did have an interesting connection to Glendale. Obviously, I was personally mocked at the city council hearing for supporting that, and which is fine. It makes it more memorable hearing. but I do think the commission should be careful, especially when we know it's going to be designated and we know it's going to be named after Beggs just because of our naming policy. Even that naming policy, my original, when I started here, I thought we should only name properties after people significant under criterion 2, and that every other property should be named after its address. That's just kind of how I learned to do this stuff. Commission disagreed, and we now have our naming policy, which we've stuck with for years now. If my recommendation would be if the commission was intrigued enough to want more information about Beggs, that you continue the hearing so that applicants could see if there's more out there, do the research, and bring that back. But if you decide that you want to designate it under criterion 2, that's your decision, not mine. So there you have staff's.
I think, to be fair, I'm going to say we probably just don't have enough information today, and I think we'd all be hard-pressed to continue the hearing. And so knowing the home will be designated under criterion 3.
At least we think so.
We should probably, I think we keep bringing up the Art Baker issue, but we also have to remember that we were designating that house just on Art Baker, not for the merits of the house itself. So that made it a lot stickier, for lack of a better.
That one was an unusual case.
For lack of
I think my issue is it's like a subtle thing of what we've been just discussing, that yes, there are many people who were in high-level positions and had an influence and did things, but then you have hardcore documented evidence of what exactly certain people did. And we do have those for the railroad. We do have information for people who really contributed to the railroad in a very specific way that's attached to them. So that's how I see the difference. And I'm not saying he isn't an important person and didn't do a lot. Obviously, he was all his life a leader, and got a town named after him in his home state. And but we're talking about, historical facts here, and I just, I'm not seeing the connection. I wish I did, but I think it's great that the house is named after him, and you dug up all this history about him, and his historical legacy is alive and well and living in your application.
And I agree with Commissioner Morgan that it's not history and historic preservation are not just about the Huntingtons and the Stanfords. It's about people who we've never heard of before who really did remarkable things. But if we start saying, oh, he was an early Glendalian and he was one of the few who was here, well, that opens up the slippery slope of, well, let's designate every early property associated with someone. So I think there's that burden of proof that we always put on the applicant. But ultimately, you were, like I said before, the gatekeepers for this, and you help staff determine what the threshold for the commission is in terms of how we recognize people.
Well, we could, at this point, does anyone want to add anything or say anything else at this point? And I'll ask because, we've been sitting here talking about your application, and we can always open up the public hearing if there's something you're compelled to communicate with us. And if you want to, you can, but otherwise we'll just go right ahead with it. Probably, so I will open the public hearing and allow you to say
If it will
something.
make this take longer, then let's just take Charles Beggs off.
You just want to go home.
I'm cool with that.
There's great historic precedents for the path of least resistance.
That's what I'm talking about. But not about my house, but just to further what Jay was saying about the Louise Dryden. Another cool thing about it that I dug up is when Charles Beggs commissioned Robert Fisk to build it, he had every apartment done differently. So they each had a theme, right down to the light switches and the fixtures. There was the Moroccan apartment, the Chinese apartment, the Indian apartment. I mean, I would love to know how much of that is left, although I probably don't want to know. You know what I mean?
But it's amazing that you
But I
dug
thought that was
up.
cool.
Another example of your passion.
My history geekitude. Go ahead and say it.
Yeah,
It's all right.
Your history. Yeah, well, that's great. There's nothing like a geek.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
actually
thank you.
very
There's
fascinating.
nothing like a
Yeah.
geek. That's like my takeaway from tonight.
That's right.
Did we come to consensus on the garage door? Are we asking for a replacement, did we say? or-
Do we?
I heard everyone
Yes,
say
we
they
want me
agreed,
to
they
read
agreed
back?
with staff's
We didn't.
Okay.
conditions, but I
Yeah, I think
And that's one of the
Commissioner
conditions,
Crignati
right?
wasn't
Okay.
concerned about
windows
the
and a garage
existing
door.
door.
That's fine.
And I think, not everyone mentioned it, but
That's right, it's in the
I think
conditions.
there were at least
so.
3 of you had mentioned replacing the door.
So, does someone want to make a motion to recommend
I'd
to
be
City
happy.
Council that we nominate this
Yeah,
property?
I'd be happy to move that the Historic Preservation Commission recommend to the City Council that the property at 408 Ross Street to be called the Beggs House after its initial occupants be designated as a historic resource in the Glendale Register of Historic Resources, along with the original cedar tree in the front yard. And that the HPC recommend that the City Council authorize the city manager to enter into a Mills Act contract with the property owners for property tax savings. Also, with the conditions that for the installation of appropriate replacements for the aluminum window in the laundry room at the rear elevation, the aluminum window in the addition at the east elevation, and the garage door to be converted to wood.
Which we'll revise to say inappropriate vinyl door instead of non-original. So.
Yes.
Okay.
Does the motion need does the motion need a time period on those conditions?
Yes, thank you.
No, right, yes.
Yeah.
we
How long do
need-
they have for that one?
I don't know. What do
I think
we
it's
all
usually
think
2
is
years,
fair?
right?
We do 1 to 3
2 years.
usually.
3 years? You
What?
can,
Well, the tendency is to think about the expense involved and
The
labor
amount of
involved.
items.
This is a relatively minor set of conditions, so it's 1 or 2 would be typical.
I know the work plan is pretty ambitious, but I think that's just a suggested work plan.
Yeah,
Right,
until we
so
change our policy,
for-
we don't monitor that work plan.
So I think, I would think 2 windows and a garage door, probably a year?
No.
2?
Two.
Okay. 2 years?
that
Okay.
doesn't include everything you wrote, that's just these things?
Yeah,
Okay.
2 years.
I second
Right.
the motion. Oh,
Okay, we're going to second the motion with the 2-year add-on. Okay, roll call.
I'm sorry, who seconded? Thank you.
Shire.
Okay. Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Crignati?
Yes.
And Chair Bedore?
Yes,
5-0, motion passes to recommend designation.
thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, and we look forward to touring your house. In September. Again. Yes.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. So we move on to the last item, which is your Mills Act condition fulfillment update.
Here's the evening surprise, which may not be a surprise.
Postponed again.
I am so sorry. I put this on the agenda thinking it would make it happen.
We
I
are
really wanted it to
Crushed.
happen. And it just,
Oh, I forgot.
I won't make any excuses. We will do our very, very best to put it on.
I forgot to mention this, I'm sorry, going back to the 408 Ross, that we received a very nice supportive letter from the Historic District Committee signed by all the members of the committee with your beautiful Casa Verdugo Historic District logo on it, which is a replica of the bell tower of the Mission Revival House, Casa Verdugo. So obviously you're very well established as a historic district committee. But anyway, so another big vote of support for you.
And just by way of sweetening the anticipation of talking about the Mills Acts, I had a recent meeting. I won't even tell you which project it's about, but it was one of the most wonderful, productive meetings I've had about Mills Act conditions, and I felt really great about things. So there you go. I'm not telling you.
Was it? Oh,
Was it a homeowner or a city person?
that's so curious.
I know. That's where I'm going to leave you. So.
Goodness gracious.
No,
But you're
it was
going to
just
tell
fun.
us, you're going to tell us next time.
Indeed.
Yeah, we have to wait.
Hopefully in May.
Well, then we'll be here.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
So,
Wait, before you close,
yes,
May is Historic Preservation Month.
yes, it is.
Are we doing anything? Are you doing the thing like we did at the library?
The library does not have, well, the library is only opening May 1st for their grand opening, and they have not returned at this point the display cases. So we've lost the display cases that we've used in City Hall. We now have lost the ones at the library. We're going to talk with the library because I think that's a great centralized location to do this.
Perfect place.
We're going to talk once they settle in to see if we can do something there next year, because we have a lot of materials prepared, ready to roll with that. The Restoration Expo is being held more in conjunction with Earth Day than Historic Preservation Month, but it's close. We will ask City Council to do the proclamation for Historic Preservation Month, so I'll send you guys an email about that. It's always great to have members of the Commission, Historical Society, the public, homeowners of future designations, hopefully, to show up for that. And we just have to check on the council calendar to set it up. So,
Okay, that's great.
but I realize
we're,
it's getting tight. So
we're going to do that.
yeah, we'll do that.
Good. Okay.
Definitely. Sometime during May,
Curious,
we'll do that.
Did they just take out the display cases at City Hall, or we
Oh,
just
a long
don't
time
know?
ago, yeah.
They did?
Yeah,
Construction.
yeah, when they kind of redid the floor and all of that.
I didn't even notice.
Yeah, there is one very small case where they have a nice historic display.
Oh, that one's
It's so
permanent.
small, I don't know that
Yeah.
we want to, mess with that. But
The building, the city.
All right, can I adjourn the meeting? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.